So we've been looking at ecosystems, what makes up an ecosystem, and how ecosystems can change through time. We're going to look now within the ecosystem at the life that lives there and the diversity between the different species that occur within an ecosystem. So it's important to remember that living things are very diverse, and we can take all life, everything that's considered living, and classify it into kingdoms. Now we've got 6 main kingdoms, and we base that division on 1, how they get their food, and 2, the structure of their cells. So whether they are capable of making their own food or they have to eat something else, and then their cells, whether they're single cellular or multicellular organisms. So here's our 6 down here. We've got plants, animals, fungi, protists, and then the 2 bacteria, archaebacteria and eubacteria. So here's a quick table of the different kingdoms of life. If you want to put this down, you can, or if you want to do it as we go, this information will appear as we go through our notes. But you've got those 2 bacteria, which are the most simple, fungi a little bit more complex, in your protist, and then plants and animals are the most complex. So archaebacteria and eubacteria are both microscopic. They're both single-celled. They don't have a nucleus, but they do have a cell wall, and they reproduce by dividing in half. So in that regard, they're very similar. And actually, when I was in high school, it was one kingdom called Monera. But since then, they have divided them based on how common they are and how extreme their living circumstances are. So archaebacteria are often found in very extreme places. These are the bacteria that are found right next to your hydrothermal vents in the bottom of the ocean or close to volcanoes, potentially in outer space. We don't know. But they can survive in very extreme places, and some can do chemisynthesis instead of photosynthesis. Now, eubacteria are very common. I use the phrase "you" as eubacteria are found in you. Any bacteria that you get sick with or that are in your gut helping you digest your food, those are all eubacteria. They're found in animal bodies and as well in the soil. Both bacteria will break down waste and the remains of organisms, and they'll return those nutrients back into the cycle. They'll start cycling those nutrients and help recycle the nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus. We talked a little bit about bacteria already when we were talking about nitrogen fixation, how you have those nitrogen fixing bacteria. So they're useful for recycling those nutrients. And they can, in the process of recycling nutrients, they can help organisms that they live within, including humans like you and me, extract nutrients from food. So they live in our intestines, and they'll help us break down the food that we eat into tiny little packages of nutrients that we can easily digest and pull into our bodies. Now, protists are a diverse group of one-celled organisms, but then they also include some many-celled relatives. So think like amoeba. You may have seen the amoeba sisters, or you may have seen amoeba in pond water. Those are kind of animal-like, while kelp is more plant-like. So protists are really kind of a diverse group of tiny organisms. Some protists you may have heard about before are diatoms. They float in the ocean. They're a food source for a lot of larger sea life. Plasmodium, which is a protist that can cause the disease malaria, is something that you might get vaccinated across if you go to vaccinated for if you go across the ocean to some places like maybe Africa where malaria runs rampant. And then algae, good old-fashioned green pond scum, is a protist, as well as seaweed and phytoplankton. Now, fungi gets a little bit more complicated. Your cells do have a cell nuclei, but they still have a cell wall. Now, fungi don't create their own food like some of our phytoplankton, or later like plants will, but they will get their food by releasing a chemical outside their bodies to help break down the organic matter around them and then absorbing those nutrients through their bodies. So like bacteria that we were talking about, they can break down dead organisms and help recycle those nutrients back into the system. They can also cause some diseases. When they release that toxic stuff to try to digest the organic matter, that can be a bad thing. Diseases like athlete's foot is caused by a fungus. It also gives cheese its flavor, so it's not necessarily always a bad thing. It could be a good thing, like giving a blue cheese, that's a fungus. And yeast, which is a fungus, makes bread rise by giving off that carbon dioxide as it reproduces. Plants are a little bit more complex than fungi. They still have cell walls like fungi do. They're rigid bodies, but they have many cells, and they can actually make their own food using the sun's energy in a process called photosynthesis. Most plants live on land. Of course, there are aquatic plants as well, and they get their water and nutrients from the soil, and they get their sunlight, of course, from the sun, and then oxygen and carbon dioxide from the air. But then again, there are, like we said, some aquatic plants that will get their water and nutrients either from the soil if they're rooted on the bottom, or from the water itself if they're floating plants. And then of course they need to be where they can reach that sunlight and get the oxygen and carbon dioxide out of either dissolved in the water, or maybe they float up on top and they can get it out of the air. Now we can take plants and divide them into three main branches of plants. Right? One of the most primitive is the lower plants. Lower plants were the very first land plants. They did not have vascular tissue, which vascular tissue, if you think about the old experiment where you took celery and put it in water and food coloring, and then the food coloring went up through the celery, that vascular tissue is what the food coloring, what it would turn blue or red or whatever as it got pulled up into the celery. Right? So that's vascular tissue. This didn't have that. It was very, very primitive in its structure. And instead of having seeds or fruit, it had pollen spores that it just released. So those reproductive parts were either released into the air or into the water, where they transferred to the next and created new, very simple plants. They couldn't grow very big because they missed that vascular tissue. They had to stay close. So think moss, are very, very small, very tiny. And they have to live in very damp places. They need that moisture. They can't hold on to it very well because of that absence of vascular tissue. So they need a constant supply of dampness. So mosses, ferns, these are all those very lower primitive plants. Then next on the scale of complexity is our gymnosperms. Gymnosperms are woody plants. So now you are getting bigger things like trees. Pine is a gymnosperm, fir. They produce seeds, but the seeds are not enclosed in fruits. They're more naked and exposed. So these conifers, you have the seeds inside the cone. When the cone opens up, then the seeds are dispersed either by the wind or by animals transferring them from one place to another. And to fertilize those seeds, they produce pollen. And this is what makes our allergies go nuts this time of year, is the pollen from the gymnosperms being released into the air. Most of your gymnosperms, not all, but most of them have needle-like leaves, and that's for water retention. Those needle-like leaves don't allow water to evaporate as easily, so they hold on to their moisture a lot better. So pines, cedar, cypress, when we talked about the boreal forest or the taiga, they had those needle-like leaves because they were more dry areas, and so they needed the gymnosperm to hold on to that moisture there. And then angiosperms are the most recent, the most complex. They do have plants that flower and produce fruit. So the seeds for the next generation are contained in the fruit. You can see there is an apple flower here. And then once the apple flower is fertilized, then that ovum underneath will grow and turn into an apple, which is the fruit that we eat. The flowers are that reproductive part. Some is still pollen carried by wind, but others have adapted a relationship with insects, birds, animals, bats, to be fertilized, to be pollinated by those animals. Most of the food that we eat are angiosperms. Most of the building materials like oak and our fibers like cotton all come from flowering plants. We're very dependent upon angiosperms, and then thus on the pollinators that allow these to do their thing. All right, finally, let's talk animals. Animals cannot make their own food. They have to eat something else, whether that's a plant or whether it's another animal. They do not have a cell wall. They have a cell membrane. Their bodies are very soft and squishy and flexible. And they're mobile. They move around. Plants don't. Fungi don't. They stay in one spot. But animals, at least during one stage of their lives, will be mobile. They'll move around from one place to another. Coral, we talked about with coral reefs. Coral is actually an animal, even though we think of it almost more like a plant because it stays in one place. When coral is first born, I guess you would say, the little coral polyps will hitch a ride on a water current and go to a new place where they attach and cling on and create that coral reef. Same thing with like oysters and clams. At one point in their life, they are mobile and then they attach and stay. So they have to be mobile at least during some point in their lives in order to be considered an animal. Now, speaking of coral and clams, we have different types of animals, depending on whether or not they have a skeletal system. So animals that lack backbones or skeletal systems are called invertebrates. They have to possibly attach to a surface and filter feed, or like insects, they stay mobile. They have some kind of an exoskeleton. That exoskeleton allows them to move very quickly. They also reproduce very quickly. They're able to fly usually at some point in their life, and they're very, very small. A lot of your insects and your plants co-evolved a relationship, possibly based on pollination. And so they're very useful for pollinating crops, but they can also eat our crops. It's a love-hate thing with insects. They can also spread disease. But then again, they can also, some invertebrates, some insects will eat other insects that we find to be pests. So depends on what the insect or the invertebrate is as to whether we love them or hate them. But either way, they're part of a big ecosystem and they all work together. Then we've got the vertebrates. That's like you and me. We have a backbone. We have a skeletal system on the inside. The very first vertebrates that we're able to find in our geologic record are fish. And so it makes sense. Everything started in the ocean. And so they're the very first things that got that internal skeletal system. Today, most of our vertebrates live on land. So that skeletal system allowed them to support their bodies even outside of the water holding them up. So from fish, amphibians moved onto land, and they're still kind of half and half. They're partially aquatic. They will live on land, think frogs, salamanders, but then they have to go back to water to lay their eggs for the next generation. The first vertebrates to live exclusively on land were reptiles, so turtles, lizards, snakes, crocodiles, dinosaurs. They were the first ones to live exclusively on land. We have birds that are warm-blooded and they have feathers. Bird eggs have hard shells, and then mammals are warm-blooded like birds, but our bodies have fur instead of feathers, and we give birth to live young instead of shelled eggs, and feed the young milk as their first food. And so warm-blooded, both birds and mammals are able to maintain that body temperature. And being able to maintain our body temperature allows us to live where other animals cannot. So places where you don't find many reptiles and amphibians and invertebrates, you are able to find mammals and birds. So this is a crash course on the different kingdoms of life that all exist in our ecosystems. And we'll look more at how they are adapted perfectly for the ecosystem or the biome in which they live next time.